Joining me today to answer your questions is Freddie Hayward, our political correspondent. Okay, so before we dig into our listener questions that do overfloweth from our virtual mailbag, we must touch on last night's Question Time Leaders Special. Who performed best? Who performed worse? Freddie, what did we learn? What was your reaction?
I thought Ed Davey actually had quite a good half hour. He had this strange, Andrew described it as a sad dog persona in his review of the debate. He looked extremely contrite. He's got this earnest, I'm sorry, please forgive me for tuition fees atmosphere about him. But I think the broader thing was that each of the key candidates were essentially saying sorry. Rishi Sunak was saying sorry for Liz Truss. Keir Starmer was essentially saying sorry for Jeremy Corbyn. Ed Davey for tuition fees and their support for the Conservatives during the coalition. So it felt like this sorry tour of British politics, really. So it wasn't that edifying or inspiring, but it was. I think they were trying to tap in or recognise the fact that so many people are disillusioned with politics that they need to at least pretend to be more honest with voters.
Yeah, the audience seemed pretty unimpressed with all of them, certainly with Sunak and Starmer. They didn't get an easy ride. Sunak got shouts of shame when he talked about leaving the ECHR.
Very Game of Thrones.
Very Game of Thrones. Shame. How do you think Keir Starmer handled the inevitable Jeremy Corbyn question? Because he got like a slightly different answer from him on that than we've had previously.
Yeah, not that well. I mean, he made this comparison with Boris Johnson. He essentially said that Jeremy Corbyn would have been a better Prime Minister than Boris Johnson. That's a new line he wouldn't have wanted. He probably wanted the answer to that question to not make any news, but it did because there was something new in there. So it was a mishap, and he's done that a few times where he either can't say the predetermined line. We saw that with shutting down the tax question back in the first head-to-head debate. But overall, he didn't have to make that much of an effort. I mean, I don't think he did that much to lose votes. I don't think he did that much to win them. Andrew made the point in his piece that he looked a little bit like he was coasting to victory, which is something that he should resist. But it's we've had so many of these debates now, Rachel. We've had so many interviews. Nigel Farage doing another big interview with the BBC, I think it is tonight. So I think people probably are a little bit fatigued. They're probably not watching them more, particularly given the Euros were on just before the debate. But I don't think anything changed. There was just a slightly different tone in what they were saying.
Yeah, too many debates, too many leader specials, too many
polls.
Too much analysis. But as you say, Andrew Marr covered it for the New Statesman last night, and he said of Rishi Sunak that the main takeaway was that Sunak managed to avoid punching a member of the audience. Certainly looked like really quite angry and smiley, that kind of smile where he's sort of through gritted teeth. Sunak is not enjoying this campaign. That's kind of quite obvious and quite visible. And he got into a bit of a mess as well over what the proposed sanctions for young people not doing national service would be. And he sort of suggested maybe they might have an impact on whether they can get a driving licence or access finance. I don't think those lines felt like they had been prepared or thought through beforehand. That was a bit of a mess, wasn't it?
Yeah, completely. And the other thing that was risky for Rishi Sunak is he was against the public. He was against the audience. He couldn't just throw a cheap jibe across at Keir Starmer like he can in the head-to-heads. And he had to constrain himself, constrain that sort of tetchy, angry, irritable, slightly supercilious tone that he can sometimes adopt. And I think he didn't do that great a job of doing it, to be honest. It was very clear that he would happily disagree with the questioners. There was one point where a woman asked him about the Rwanda scheme, and he just said, "Look, I disagree with you on this," which is, I think, is fine for him. Many of the public probably do agree with him, and he's trying to strike that dividing line with Labour anyway. But it was a slightly different tactic. It was less ecumenical, let's say.
And obviously, there's going to be another special because Nigel Farage kicked up a fuss about not being invited, and the Green Party leaders are going to be involved in that as well, and also Plaid Cymru, I think. We're going to go on to our first question, which is actually about Farage and reform. This is from somebody who has called themselves sincerely a big fan with a smiley face. So thank you very much, whoever you are. And they ask, why are so many people afraid of reform in opposition? as in being in Parliament in opposition, when quite a few Conservative MPs share their views and have expressed them while in power. Also, good point this, look at George Galloway. He hasn't really had any political earthquake moments since being in the House of Commons. What will change, really? A few Nigel Farage speeches that barely anyone listens to. Freddie, why is everyone so terrified of Nigel Farage?
Let's go to the Galloway point, because I think that illustrates the argument. That's a really good point, because myself included, did make the case that Galloway might have a bigger impact in Parliament if he won his seat than it's turned out that he has. I think that's partly because we had the earlier general election, but it's also, more importantly, because his party, the Workers' Party, is not polling nationally in any way in the same way that Nigel Farage's Reform is. That gives Farage a ballast, a reason to say that he should be on these debates. But I also think that his getting a seat won't make that much of a difference, just because he already has a huge amount of influence in British politics. He's much more respectable than George Galloway, at least in the media's eyes as well. He's less extreme, so he will get invited on the panels, the talk shows, etc., etc. Now, I think the question of what he gains from getting to Parliament is much more about the sort of intra-party politics. Can he influence the Tory party, because he'll be with them every single day? He'll be in the chamber. He'll be corralling them through the voting lobbies or whatever it might be. The proximity will be much greater. And as we know, with rebellions, it's important for MPs to be together, to be in the tea room, to be in the corridors, to make those plans. So I think that will make a difference. He'll be seen as less of a pariah. I think he'll gain respectability. He'll also gain some democratic legitimacy. So he'll be able to say, people, maybe 2 or 3 seats or 1 seat, whatever it might be, a significant number of people have voted for reform. We don't know how many votes they'll get. Remember back in 2015, they got around 4.8 million votes and they got 1 seat. So let's see. But he will have all those things. So that will make a difference, but we've got to remember his influence is already very high.
Yeah, I think the issue of democratic legitimacy is a key one. You can't just sort of write him off and ignore him. He will be, if he wins a seat, sort of a member of the House of Commons, and that comes with more of a platform. At the same time, though, he will be one MP of 650, and I think he will obviously be bound by the same rules around MPs and MPs' interests and things, which, as the leader of a party who up until recently had a show on GB News, he hasn't really had to bother that much with. So I think it will come with strings attached that at the moment, up until now, he's kind of been free to just do whatever he likes, essentially. The Galloway point, you're entirely right. Like George Galloway, yes, he does have a party around him, but it is essentially just him. There is no kind of widespread support for George Galloway's party in other parts of the country, whereas even though Reform aren't expected to win more than 1 seat, that one being Nigel Farage, the extent to which they will win votes and kind of take votes off the Conservatives and therefore have an impact in probably around 100 seats, that is what has got the Conservatives absolutely terrified, and their worry is that that's not just about this election. And I think the big question for whoever wants to take over the Tory party after this election is going to be, would you let Nigel Farage into the party? And that's going to be sort of an existential part of that debate that the Conservative Party is going to have with itself. Okay, Freddie, what's the next question?
So this is one from Joshua Barretto, who asks, if Sunak fails to win his seat, can he even go to the King to resign?
I love these kind of questions that really get to the heart of Britain's unwritten constitution. The short answer is yes, because the government and MPs are actually separate entities. And at the moment, from the day that Parliament was dissolved, there are no MPs. There are only candidates. We don't have any MPs at the moment, but we still have a government. We still have a prime minister. We still have ministers in all the key roles. And, hypothetically, if there was a national emergency, if Britain got invaded, then those would be the ministers in charge of Britain's response. So Sunak is prime minister because he's been invited by the King to form the government, and therefore he remains prime minister until he goes to the king and resigns, or indeed until the king chooses somebody else, which I don't think King Charles is going to get involved in picking prime ministers outside of an election. Although, who knows? But essentially, yes, he can go to the king to resign.
Yeah, Sunak's got 3 roles at the moment, hasn't he? Prime Minister, leader of the Conservative Party, and the candidate for his constituency in Yorkshire, none of which are really connected. He can be one of them, all of them, none of them. But I think it's interesting the question about how long he will stay on. I was speaking to one cabinet minister last night, and they were essentially saying that they think he's going to stay on for a while. They were remembering Michael Howard's decision back in 2005 to stay on for a while, and that completely changed the dynamics of the leadership election, because at the start of that election, David Davis was doing extremely well amongst MPs, but because Howard stayed on to the autumn, David Cameron was able to bring enough MPs together to win. So that will matter. I think obviously if he loses his seat, he'll have to go as soon as possible, and they'll expedite the contest. But if he doesn't, he will be able to, and maybe he'll want to do this as well to sort of stave off the accusations that he wants to go to California and work in an AI company. So that'll be an interesting dynamic to witness.
Do you see him though, lasting the Parliament, like Theresa May on the backbenches?
No, I don't see that at all. I don't see that at all. I think it's about maintaining credibility. I think he has said though that he would stay, and that's his priority. And he's said this is my home. I love representing the people of Richmond in Yorkshire. Fine. I mean, let's see how long that lasts. I doubt it. I mean, Gordon Brown stayed for a very long time. Theresa May, Tony Blair left immediately. So there wasn't even any facade of maintaining his sense of public service. But Rishi Sunak, we don't know. He's got this dilemma because people are already predicting that he's going to go. So he almost can't do it because it'll prove them right.
I think he's just going to go. Not like immediately, but I think within 6 months or so. And actually, I was researching for a feature that's going to be the Weekend Report out tomorrow, and I went and looked at Rishi Sunak's selection in 2014, and the way that was covered by Conservative Home, which is sort of the in-house magazine of the wider Conservative Party, and there's kind of one paragraph on how he was a sort of successful in the finance world, nothing about how long he'd been involved in the party, nothing about him being an activist or a volunteer or helping out on the council, nothing. He kind of just went for a seat and William Hague's constituency and got it with kind of no deeper ties to the Conservative ecosystem, and that suggests to me that his relationship with the party is quite shallow, quite light touch. And that he could be gone sooner than we think. But we'll have to wait and see.
It was Mr. Dowden, I think, who helped get him his seat back then, because he's always been the man in the shadows sorting out the candidate selections.